Hello, it is Sunday, 2nd of October 2022. I'm wearing a Pop Believe Itself t-shirt. There is a reason, which of course you know because you can see the title of it. This is Notcast 237, and today I am talking about Nine Inch Nails' third or fourth, depending on your point of view, major album, released in 1999, one of the very last albums of the 90s. It is The Fragile, and I'm also going to be talking about the and All That Could Have Been live release, loads of singles and loads of soundtrack stuff. So this is a period which I found quite difficult to be a fan of Nine Inch Nails, primarily because it had been 5 years since the Downward Spiral came out, and 5 years is a long time in anything, let alone something as transient as music. I think the best way to describe that 5 years is really Nine Inch Nails aged out of fame and popularity. You remember, they were only really popular, like newspaper, Kerrang kind of headline level, for that 18 months that ran from the middle or early part of 1994 to the end of 1995, and they only played the UK and Europe once in that period. So when you think about when you start getting into groups and you're 14, 15, maybe a little bit younger, maybe a little bit older, is that, 5 years, you go back 5 years from that, you're like 8, 9, 10 maybe. The things that you're interested in when you're 8 or 9 or 10, completely different from the things that you're into when you're 15, and maybe the things that you're into when you're 20 or 25. As many of you know, many times I criticise the existence of golf, but when you get older, of course, some of the things which you see in groups or that draw you towards bands when you're about 18, 19, are things that maybe aren't necessarily issues when you're 24, 25. So when The Fragile was released, which was September 1999, I was 26 years old, and for one respect, you can think about music as being almost like of an extended adolescence. It's music that sticks with you when you're younger, and by the time you get to the age of maybe 25, 26, some of the things which you've been railing at or railing against you at 15 or 16, the lack of agency, the lack of control, the lack of recognition, the lack of achievement that you may have had in your life when you had all these ideas but you weren't able to realize them because of things like money and romance and finance and love and all that type of stuff, are things that by the time you get to the your mid-20s are problems that you've been actively seeking to solve. You've been trying to meet people, have relationships, get jobs, invent Facebook or whatever on earth it is that you might have been doing elsewhere. So for an artist that hasn't evolved over that period of time, you can then start to think that maybe you've grown beyond what that band is. And that's kind of like the experience that I had when I listened to The Fragile for the first time in 1999. Now, being a Nine Inch Nails fan, there were, one of the things you get used to, like Guns N' Roses, is patience. And one of the other things is, you're not necessarily grateful, but aware of the little things which you get kind of thrown to you by the band. So even though Nine Inch Nails weren't publicly active, privately they were still doing a heck of a lot of things. 1996 saw the release of the soundtrack to the video game Quake, made by the same people that brought you Doom, and Quake is a fantastic game, although albeit it's like 26 years old now, so it's kind of like very much baby steps, but the soundtrack was an hour of Trent ambling noodly along through various ambient terrifying sounds, a precursor to his soundtrack work. And by the way, if you get the CD for Quake, track 1, data track, that's about 100 meg of video game stuff, and then the rest of it, track 2 onwards, is about an hour of Trent Reznor ambient horror music, which has now been repressed on vinyl, but I don't need it on vinyl. So Quake there. The second thing which came out was the soundtrack to the David Lynch film Lost Highway, and Lost Highway is, in my opinion, a fantastic movie. I've talked about the movies of David Lynch way back in the 80s. That's the Notcast 80s, not the actual 1980s, and ranked his films and talked about which ones are my favourites and all that type of stuff. I think Lost Highway I really rate. It is like a great many of David Lynch movies. It's dream logic. You kind of vaguely follow the patterns and textures of what's going on and hope that everything kind of works out. The soundtrack was compiled by Trent and features a Nine Inch Nails song, The Perfect Drug, and a number of instrumental tracks by Trent, including, I think, Driver Down, and looking very quickly through here, one called Video Drones Questions. That one really rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Again, dipping his hand into the world of soundtrack music. And as I've talked earlier, listening to the Nine Inch Nails multi-tracks for albums like The Downward Spiral and With Teeth is that one of the things that he's perhaps really, really good at, and I suspect he knows it, is layering sounds to create atmospheres and then building songs on top of them. And so The Perfect Drug being probably the white whale for most Nine Inch Nails fans, because it wasn't played live until I think 2014 on the American tour by the band, but it was released as a single in the US and in the UK. I think this is the American version, which features the 7-inch edit of The Perfect Drug. The UK version only featured 5 mixes of the track, which means if you wanted to hear the actual Nine Inch Nails track, you had to go and buy the soundtrack album. Perfect Drug is, I think, the first of the songs that came out of the post-Downward Spiral period, which was, Trent sporting some kind of Mexican killer moustache, long hair kind of vibe. Was a pretty weird kind of standalone song, but it was good to know that the band hadn't disappeared off the face of the earth and were still doing things, because obviously in the days before band websites, all you really heard was occasionally you'd see like a thing in Kerrang that went, someone's left Nine Inch Nails and joined Guns N' Roses again, and you're like, okay, if you say so, man. Not really paying attention a huge amount to that. 1998 was a very quiet year. There was 30 seconds of Nine Inch Nails music that I think was broadcast as on the trailer on the MTV Awards, saying Nine Inch Nails album coming soon. But there was also, by the way, a fantastic and little-known track that Trent provided vocals for, called Black Bomb, on the album Here Here by Wink. And this is, if you want to think about, well, what's a song that sounds like classic Nine Inch Nails that I don't know, Big Black Bomb is exactly where it's at. Sonically, it's very, very reminiscent of the Fragile era. Vocally, of course, very, very similar. This is basically, it feels just like a single that never got released. This track, Big Black Bomb, off the Here Here soundtrack. So again, I do recommend that highly. But then the silence was broken by the release of the US only single, The Day the World Went Away. Here's the CD single that was only released in the US. There's a 12-inch single as well. I don't have that because I wasn't buying vinyl. And The Day the World Went Away, by the way, is, in my opinion, it's a very good Nine Inch Nails song. Maybe not a great choice as a single, actually, but a great Nine Inch Nails song, reminiscent of kind of a cross between Head Like a Hole and Hurt. It's got that kind of plaintive, heartbroken, almost resigned defeatism around it. So, the lyric itself, The Day the Whole World Went Away. It's backed with a track called Starfuckers. You'll hear more about that later. And a quiet mix of The Day the World Went Away, alongside on the 12-inch a Porter Ricks remix, which is a kind of ambient, vaguely kind of like sub-house kind of thing. It's not particularly great. You don't need to spend quite a lot of money to get the 12-inch to hear it, because it's not particularly worth it. But no, The Day the World Went Away is a song I've seen Nine Inch Nails play pretty much every show since they released it, actually, although I haven't seen that many Nine Inch Nails shows. I did see 3 on this tour, by the way, the Fragile tour, which proportionally is probably quite good going, I think. But it's a great single. By the way, for the album release of the Fragile, the vocal was resung and re-recorded. So if you have the single, you have an exclusive vocal performance on the single of The Day the World Went Away. And here we go. This is the big beastie. This is the Fragile, released on the 21st of September 1999. It's 103 minutes long, and it's widely regarded by many people as their masterpiece. But of course, many people will say that anything that Trent Reznor releases is Nine Inch Nails' masterpiece, and I think calling it the Fragile is an appropriate name for it. If you have the CD edition, here is a 1999 CD edition. It's got quite a fragile case, actually, and it opens into a left and a right, and you can really think of them as it's not just a double album, it's two albums inside the same package, similar to Load and Reload, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, the Mannix Rewind, the film, and Futurology is albums recorded at the same time out of the same sessions. This time they're all released together as one magnum opus, and towards the end of the recording, Trent brought in a man called Bob Ezrin, who was responsible for sequencing Pink Floyd's The Wall to create a version of the album that did work. So this goes into some new areas actually for Nine Inch Nails, the Fragile. It's got industrial, it's got ambient, it's got electronic, it's got straight up dirty rock on it. It's about a sense of, being extended and being opulent. The idea that you would put the album on and you would listen to nothing else for 2 hours is a pretty ambitious task, actually. And the sequence and the structure of the albums is broadly the same, in so much as that they have a very similar pacing, very similar construction, very similar kind of feel. So there's no real sense of one album ending and another one beginning, apart from obviously the idea where there's side splits on vinyl, or there's a necessity to change from CD1 to CD2. So from a fan's perspective, apparently The Fragile is an album that is a concept LP that explores survival. And by that, what I mean is, the concept of what happens after you've killed yourself. Now that sounds pretty bizarre. Obviously the Downward Spiral as an album had a concept around reducing somebody's component parts and complications of their life down to the bare minimum, and then starting again through on the album, the audible sense of suicide. And The Fragile is kind of like when you hit rock bottom and then you try to kind of pull your way up by your fingernails from the pit. What happens next? So it's an album about the exploration of the concepts of survival, what survival looks like, what happens post-traumatic event, the idea of, well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and that therefore you kind of survive it. So really it's basically this is PTSD on vinyl or CD, and it's really kind of like probably a therapist's dream, come to think of it. An album around what happens when you have the post-trauma event, what you look like and who you are after it. It's got some themes in it around existing in a world of violence, where people behave terribly to other human beings, where they hurt and disparage and diminish other people and their self-worth. There's emotional violence that's in there. There's a huge chunk of the album which is around dealing with who's going to be around to pick up the pieces, as the perfect drug has it. There's an element of going, well, perhaps Trent is addressing fame, addressing the fallout of fame, and maybe possibly a thing called paradise syndrome, which is where you get the thing that you think you always wanted, and then you work out that it wasn't actually what you wanted anyway, because the thing that you were chasing wasn't the answer to the question which you had. The thing that you were chasing may have, for example, solved financial issues, or it may have solved, for example, I can't meet someone and have a great relationship issues, but those core issues don't go away, they just change into a different set of problems. So perhaps it's around creating order from chaos, it's about finding meaning from nothing, and it's, in my opinion, it's too long, actually. The CD version, as I've said, and the LP version, about 1 3/4 hours. You could put together an expanded version of it featuring the extra songs, which comes to 2 hours 31 minutes and has 9 extra songs on it. It feels too long and too weighty and too big a statement to really absorb in one go. So this really is the very last album of the 90s. It's alt rock's last stand. Just before this came out, Limp Bizkit had set fire to the 90s at Woodstock. There was very definitely a sense that this was both the first album of the noughties and the last album of the 90s at the same time. It's a strange time to release a record. It's heavily influenced, by the way, by Tom Waits' Bone Machine. In case you don't know it, it's got quite an organic feel. There's a lot of songs that feel, I think, squelchy and organic and touched by the hand of a human, as opposed to any other version, as opposed to perhaps the clean electronics that you'll find in some of the other records. But at the same point, and even this is referenced in the remix album, is that there's an element of kind of understanding, well, what happens after systems fail and fall apart? What happens when a structure starts to collapse? What happens when you build something new out of something that no longer works? and this is kind of how the album was built. So it was made out of 173 different pieces of music. Now most songs, as I've said before, if you've got a vocal song, you've got an intro, verse, chorus, bridge, maybe a variation upon that. So that's 4 pieces of music, and then you spread that out across 30 songs, and then you've got 120 pieces of music. And then if you're Trent Reznor, you've got an extra 53 pieces of music that you put on other songs, and so you build individual bits of songs, and then you put them all together to try and see how they work. So there's the third single, fourth single, depending on who you talk to, third single released from the album, called Into the Void, which was released in Australia, which is actually a remix of the track La Mer from the album. But then Trent took it in a different direction and created a new song with it, which is pretty exciting if you're a record nerd like me. And if you're not a record nerd like me, why are you watching this? Not that I don't want you to, but there you are. So we've got, for example, track 2 on the right CD is Into the Void, and La Mer is track 11 on CD 1. So there's a sense of the whole album exists almost as a very miserable kind of symphony of self-destruction. I think, I might use that in future. And we've got a number of motifs that repeat themselves throughout the various parts of the various songs that are on the album. So let's dig in, although I've spent 16 minutes digging in already. So this is the 2016 vinyl edition of the Fragile triple LP, and here, by the way, is the lithograph. So if you bought the album on the day of release in 1999 from independent stores, you've got a numbered lithograph. This one is number 1469 of the album artwork, which I've put inside my vinyl LP. And then you've got a gatefold sleeve here, and you've got 3 vinyl discs. By the way, I think the vinyl version is quite expensive now. Vinyl is Trent Reznor's preferred format, primarily because from his point of view, it means that there are no interruptions, is that you're listening to the record and you're not kind of doing it whilst doing the washing up or something. So disc 1, side A, somewhat damaged, and then The Day the World Went Away, and I think it's the Frail and the Wretched. So the Frail, track 3, song that the band play live. In fact, if they're going to play any song off the Fragile live, it's almost definitely going to be the Frail and the Wretched, by the way, which sounds like a Smashing Pumpkins album. But what we have is, the Frail and the Wretched. So the Frail features a piano motif that is in place of a guitar solo, and it's used in another track. I think there's a Fragile title track, actually. Yes, side B. We're in this together on LP2. The Fragile title track itself features a guitar solo, which is actually the piano motif from the Frail. We're in this together. The second single released from the album has the piano motif from La Mer slowed down and played differently, and it also features some wild guitar that features in a track called The Complication. La Mer, as I've said before, features the piano and bass from Into the Void, or more correctly, Into the Void is a remix of La Mer using the piano and the bass, and then building a new song around it. We have The Great Below, which is one of the songs on the right disc here, although obviously this is the vinyl edition, which features the melody and bass line which is on the track And All That Could Have Been. That is one of the non-album songs that was released in another format. And we also have a number of lyrics which are used all through this album, which appear later on in other songs. So, for example, there is the lyric "Now You Know This Is What It Feels Like," which is on The Wretched, is also used in a track called The Great Collapse. Nothing Can Stop Us Now, which is from Pig or Piggy, is also used on La Mer, We're In This Together, bits of Ruiner and Big Man with a Gun from Downward Spiral, and a lyric about All That Could Have Been is used also between The Wretched and The Great Below, and also, of course, the name of the song And All That Could Have Been itself. So what we've got is a series of echoes and reminders that run through the album. Much in the same way as when you listen to The Wall, there's a number of repeated musical motifs that turn around through various songs. Even, I'm just thinking now, actually, I think the Fletcher Memorial Home on Pink Floyd's The Final Cut uses a guitar line that actually appears in another Pink Floyd song. So what you're doing is you're making reference to previous songs in the band's discography. Now you can argue if you're being very controversial, that Trent Reznor only has about 4 things to say, and they're largely all variations of "fuck you, I hate everybody," which I don't necessarily agree with. But obviously, the use of repeated motifs, ideas, lyrics, and musical parts kind of is, I think, to use a Sue's corner approach, is designed to create some kind of triptych where parts of the songs reference other songs as they all go together. So these, in the end, these 173 pieces turned into about 60 or so songs, of which I think 30 or so were on the album, and an extra 9 were on the instrumental release of the album, which came out in 2017, or maybe late 2016. I don't know. I think The Fragile is too much, to be honest. At the time it came out, I really didn't connect to this LP. I didn't connect to this LP for 2 reasons. As I've said before, that 5-year age gap, Trent had not moved on in those 5 years, but the rest of the world had. So no matter how good The Fragile was, the people that had got into Nine Inch Nails in, say, 1990 or 1995, and I include myself in the former of that, are people whose the things that Nine Inch Nails spoke to about life in 1990 were things that weren't necessarily the case. So at the time that Pretty Hate Machine came out, I was not happy. I was struggling with my place in the world, with who I was, with what my identity was. I was struggling with the financial inequities of the planet. Still am, of course, like a great many of us. And at the same time, also kind of wondering, well, who am I going to be when I grow up? What am I going to be? Am I going to have a relationship? Am I going to have a cat? Am I going to have a fish? What's going to happen? By the time we got to the release of The Fragile 10 years later, those questions were starting to be answered. So I was in the context of what I thought was a good relationship, which turned out to come to an end not long after the LP was released. I was living away from home in a flat with somebody that I thought I was going to grow old with. As it turned out, they grew old and I grew old, and we grew old in different places with different people. And so the album I came to the album again after the end of that relationship, when I didn't have the answers that I was seeking to why what I thought the shape of my life was going to be had been torn to pieces. And so the album made more sense to me in the rearview mirror listening to it after the fact than at the time that it came out. It was a difficult year. Of all my years that I've lived, quite a few actually, my least favourite was the calendar year 2000. What a way to start the millennia, is to have your heart ripped out and thrown away. So the album is on the vinyl, has a different configuration to the cassette, which has a different configuration to the CD. By the way, there is no one definitive way of listening to The Fragile. And this one here is, I think, the 2017 repressing on vinyl, but it replicates in almost every way apart from one booklet the original release. And here's the artwork that was pulled together. I think this artwork's done by Rob Sheridan. And what we have on the cover is actually 2 photographs at the same time. So the first photograph here on the top is a waterfall, and the second one is a close-up, I think, of a butterfly or a flower in Australia. This is a waterfall in Iceland, possibly Finland. And what it is, you've got both the majesty and power of a waterfall that's hundreds of feet tall, and then at the same point you've got the fragility of that power, and the fragility at the same point of a waterfall, and the fragility of a flower that can be crushed just by someone crushing their hand in there. So the vinyl edition has the lyrics laid out on here for all the songs on the album. So Somewhat Damaged to start off with, then The Day the World Went Away, The Wretched, We're in This Together, which was only played live 5 times, I think, by the band, and only in 2007. Then we've got The Fragile, which has that current lyric about "I won't let you fall apart." Even Deeper. There's a lot of songs on this album. No You Don't, which is great live, by the way, but I haven't seen them play it very often. Le Maire, The Great Below. And then we go to The Way Out Is Through, Into the Void, Where Is Everybody, The Mark Has Been Made, 10 Miles High, Please, Starfuckers, The New Flesh, Complication, I'm Looking Forward to Joining You Finally, The Big Come Down, underneath it all, and yeah, there you are. Of course, if you were going to put all the Nine Inch Nails songs into an AI machine and to come out with a name for a Nine Inch Nails song, it's probably going to be "I'm looking forward to joining you." Finally, you know, because their songs aren't exactly the happiest of titles there. So, The Fragile is an album that I struggle to get because there was too much material that was released in this period. It was too prolific, too quick. I mean, clearly, you've got 30, 40 songs. You don't finish them all on one day. You finish them over a period of months. And I would have preferred maybe two separate records, have two separate configurations, as opposed to sticking them all into one release in one box. By the way, calling it The Fragile is apt, because if you're going to do this, anytime you open this is quite fragile actually, this card. It's not particularly thick, not perhaps suited to be opened hundreds and thousands of times every time that you listen to it. So this packaging is by its very definition quite fragile actually. Maybe that's a deliberate attempt to make the album feel a little bit more kind of tangible and touchable. And so on and so forth. The CD booklet has the same lyrics, but with smaller slices of photographs. And there's a couple of tracks which are only on the CD. I think there's the With Decay section of the last track, Ripe, which is only on the CD, not on the vinyl. The vinyl has 10 Miles High, and I think the New Flesh on there as well, which isn't on the CD version. But second single that was released from the album, and this came out on the 27th of September, a week after the album came out, was We're In This Together, issued as 3 CD singles. Apparently these were only released in the UK, so if you're in the US they're quite difficult to get hold of and quite expensive. Obviously being in the UK, I had no idea about this. I was just like, £1.99 for an extra 2 songs. So there's Complications of the Flesh, which is an alternate version of Complication of the New Flesh, and there's a slightly extended version of The Perfect Drug on there, on Halo 15 as it was called. And then we had obviously Halo 15 again, which was the second CD single, which features the quiet version and the Porter Ricks mix of The Day the World Went Away. So you can get the Porter Ricks mix here on the CD. A little radio edit of We're In This Together, and then the last CD features 10 Miles High and the New Flesh, taken from the vinyl edition of the album there on We're In This Together. We're In This Together as a track actually was inspired by Bowie's Heroes, apparently. You know, if you listen to the vocal melody and the lyrics of it and the concept of it, the idea of two people together through a traumatic experience, surviving that, and what happens when they come out the other side of it, is broadly similar to I could be king and you could be my queen and we could swim with the dolphins. You know, it's the same kind of thing where you go, right, so you've got an experience that we are sharing, and it could be that they don't quite make sense of it, they don't make it out the other end, because obviously sometimes you have two people that go through a shared experience and at the end they don't survive as two people together, which was the experience I had at the same time that this album came out. You know, the idea of you and me, we're in this together, none of them can stop us now, we'll make it through somehow, and if the world should break in two, until the very end of me and until the very end of you, even after everything, you're the queen and I'm the king, nothing else means anything. Very clearly kind of referencing Heroes there, of course. But We're In This Together is, I think it's a very underrated Nine Inch Nails song. It's one of the most optimistic songs that I think they've ever done, actually. They're not exactly kind of bountiful with hope. The name of their publishing company is Leaving Hope after all. But there you are. The band went on tour, and they toured the Europe in November and December 1999. I saw them at the Brixton Academy twice in 3 days. And then I went to another gig in between. I went to see the Chemical Brothers at the now demolished Aston Villa Leisure Centre, which perhaps was unwise. I think the person that I was in a relationship with wondered if I was actually in a relationship with my CD collection instead of them. But I don't really know. I'm certainly not going to ask them and try and find out now. I don't care. But no, I saw them at Brixton on the first and the second night, the 2 UK shows of that tour. On the day in between, they shot a video. So Yeah, I didn't see that video. And then I saw them again for the third time at Glastonbury on the 23rd of June, which was I think the Friday, and David Bowie played on the Sunday. So in that time, they shot a video for Into the Void, which was released in Australia. Here's the Australian CD single of it. £6.99 that cost me. In order to make sure that huge fans of the band didn't feel the need to buy this in order to have a complete set of all the Halos, this one doesn't have a Halo number. Very thoughtful of you, Trent. But this is the Australian CD, which was released instead of We're in This Together. But it's backed with The Perfect Drug and The New Flesh. No new songs on there, just new packaging. And I tended to buy singles, actually, for the new songs as opposed to anything else. But that didn't always work. And then, yeah, as I said, the band played Glastonbury. Now, the band also released, at the end of the year 2000, the remix album, Things Falling Apart, available on CD and vinyl. For some reason, the vinyl of Things Falling Apart has not been repressed. Now, Trent, if you're going to be doing reissues, please do all of the reissues, including the remix albums, and put them out on vinyl. So Things Falling Apart kind of felt like a double CD or a double LP or a single CD, effectively of leftovers and extra tracks. So none of these songs were on any of the singles, by the way. And there were 10 tracks that were on here. So there was Slipping Away, which was a remix of Into the Void. There was The Great Collapse, The Wretched, Starfuckers. In fact, there's 3-4 versions of Starfuckers, depending on which version you've got. Then you've got The Frail. You've got another version of Starfuckers, 10 Miles High. You've got Metal, the cover version of Gary Newman track. Where Is Everybody, and another remix of Starfuckers. The LP configuration is slightly different to the CD, but broadly they reflect the same constituent parts. And effectively, this is almost like an alternate version of the album, but missing a few of the songs. So think of it as just a very long remix single, actually, as opposed to an actual remix album. It's generally overlooked, Things Falling Apart. It came out 6 months after the tour finished, because the tour finished on the 8th of July in Europe. It was largely kind of forgotten. The album was dead in the water. It had been out over a year at this point. There was no singles, no promotional activity for Things Falling Apart at all. But the vinyl, please repress it, Trent, because it's really expensive, and whilst I have it, not everybody does, and everybody should, much like George Michael and sex. So yeah, there we have it. The Nin site, by the way, thingsfallingapart.com and nin.com, contained an extra 16 remixes that weren't used for the album, which are now probably no longer available. I think they were nuked when the hesitation marks period began, and the band did a new website with a corporate oversight that was in there. But it was a surfeit, I think is the word, a surplus of material. There was too much stuff to listen to, too much to make sense of what was going on around us, too much to really understand what was happening. There were so many songs that were released in such a short period of time. As a fan, it was really difficult to keep track of everything. So we had the Fragile album, the double LP with 30 or 32 songs on. We had 3 singles. We had a remix album with several new songs on it. And on the 22nd of January 2022, we also had the first 9 Inch Nails live album, Things Falling Apart. Here is the double CD version of Things Falling Apart that contains 1 live album recorded in America and 1 extra CD called Still, taking its name from the Joy Division release of the same name. Still is a largely ambient and acoustic album recorded at CRC Studios in Chicago with some extra sax. It features 5 extra songs which were written for the soundtrack of Mark Romanek's film 1 Hour Photo, but they weren't used in the end. But they could have been. And those pieces were And All That Could Have Been. There was Gone Still, on The Persistence of Loss, Leaving Hope, and Adrift and At Peace. So there were 5 extra songs that were only on the Still album. So just in case you thought there weren't enough songs, yes, there's 5 extra ones on there. There's an awful lot of material released during this period. And All That Could Have Been is, in my opinion, a phenomenal live album. It was perhaps the only representation of the aggression of a 9 Inch Nails live show and the exorcism of a 9 Inch Nails live show that there was. It was released on DVD as well, but there isn't going to be a Blu-ray release, primarily because the whole thing, The whole DVD was shot on standard definition consumer digicams and edited in Final Cut Pro or whatever version of it was on Apple Macs in standard definition. And all that could have been, by the way, features a kind of a really interesting kind of like perspex kind of bit packaging here by Rob Sheridan that effectively tells you that just a glimpse, just a little reminder of a time and a place we used to live in. This DVD attempts to document the experience of Nine Inch Nails live as we were in the summer of 2000. In my eyes, Fragility 2 is a summation of what we accomplished up to this point, so it serves as a reminder of our achievements. This was the last thing that was released by what many people regard to be the classic Nine Inch Nails lineup, featuring Robin Fink, Charlie Clouser, and Danny Lohner, with Jerome Dillon on drums. And that was the lineup which broadly toured the Downward Spiral with a different drummer, by the way, on 2 CDs, or more correctly 2 DVDs. And it features some extra tracks and some multi-angles and things like that. But this thing is, since it was all shot by generally one camera a night over about 30 or 40 nights, it gives you a real visceral experience where you don't miss anything about the live show, if that makes sense. I mean, obviously I watch it and I miss seeing that version of Nine Inch Nails. I saw that version 3 times, but it feels like it's captured exactly the spirit of the evenings, the spirit of the shows, that sense of a wild kind of raw animal beast, a primal expression of rage and exorcism. And I could have seen it 4 times, but Trent decided to have an overdose and didn't play London Docklands Arena. And we were driving down to London Docklands Arena from Birmingham in the Midlands when we heard on the radio that Nine Inch Nails had pulled out. We were about halfway down the motorway and decided to turn around and come back home. We thought, shall we go to another gig? Shall we go and see Radiohead at the Royal Festival Hall, who were playing the same night? We thought, no, we don't stand a chance. It would cost us a fortune. There's no point. And it's only a band we're vaguely bothered about anyway. And then I think there were 2 more shows after that on the tour, and the tour was cancelled ahead of time so that Trent could attend to his health. He overdosed. I don't know what on, but from my perspective, I was kind of sat there I was really glad I got to see Glastonbury, which was a very last minute, short notice, fly by the seat of the pants experience going to Glastonbury in the year 2000. I didn't know on the Tuesday that I was going to be at Glastonbury on the Thursday, for example. It was that quick. Somebody had to drop out. I was like, fuck it, yeah, I'll go. And I went. But what we had, I saw Nine Inch Nails at Glastonbury. I was pacing myself because I knew I had the Saturday and the Sunday to come, and I was seeing Nine Inch Nails in a couple of weeks, so I could maybe just hold back a little bit, and so I experienced Nine Inch Nails at Glastonbury more as a case of, I want to drink this show in, I want to experience this show, I want to see what it looks like. I'm not going to go in the pit and scream all my things out, like Saint Anger. I'm not going to use that. I'm not going to get those feelings out because I've got that chance in a couple of weeks to really fucking go for it. That chance never came, and by the time that I saw Nine Inch Nails again after that, which was on the With Teeth tour, my life had turned itself upside down yet again. You can't hold on to that feeling. So I feel that the way that I said goodbye to Nine Inch Nails on that tour wasn't the way I wanted it to be, because I thought I was going to get an extra date, and I didn't. The Fragile tour, the Fragility tour, lasted for 78 shows. As I said, I saw three of those shows. So it was Europe, November and December 99, Australia and Japan in January and February. There was America in April through to June 2000, which was kind of like an arena and outdoor tour. And then there was that festival run that ran June through to July 2000. It was meant to run for longer, but Trent's health didn't allow it. Interscope, the label, in their madness, wouldn't fund the tour. So Trent did it all himself, all of his money, and you could see all the money there on stage. And it was, the band played their hearts out. But at the same point, it felt like if Nine Inch Nails can't get the band to support, can't get the label to support them on tour, who fucking well can? Nobody, obviously. It was a really strange experience. because where I was is when that album came out, you know, the things which the album was doing and addressing were not things that I was feeling, because this album was around, you know, surviving and experiencing a traumatic event and what happens when you're out the other side. The way out is through. What do you do when you've been through the great below? What happens when you've experienced the great collapse and you come through the other side and you're kind of going, the me that did exist no longer existed. There is only the me that lived through this. And what is the me that lived through this like? How have I changed? How have I been different? You know, am I a shadow of who I used to be? Am I a different me? Have I endured what therapists call the EPAS, which is the enduring personality change after catastrophic event, where you can't get back to where you were before? You have to start again from a different position and be different. You know, and that is, you know, that what this album is about. It's about surviving a catastrophe of some form, whether that's inflicted or not. And unwittingly, during the album's lifespan, I encountered one of the four worst things in my life, a huge catastrophe, which I then came out the other side of, different, more cynical, more guarded, less happy. You know, it was a really fucking awful year. And it wasn't an awful year through my design at all, because I wouldn't have wished what I experienced upon the worst of my enemies. I don't have any enemies, or at least if I do, I don't. Have I got any enemies? I don't know. I'm blocked by about 24 people on Twitter. Maybe that counts. But I don't think I do. And certainly, if I do, we've come to the understanding that we just avoid each other wherever and however possible, generally to huge success. So there it has. But the year that I had, in the year 2000, when this album was released, I wouldn't have wished it on the person in the world that I dislike the most. And of the people in the world I dislike the most, I have a ranked list, by the way. The person that bestowed upon me the chain of events that year contained would be in that list. Yes. Maybe I would have wished it on them. Who knows? That's a very long time ago now. I barely give it any thought, which is quite good, apart from when obviously I listened to this album and I'm right back there in the year 2000 with the, you know, the little hair that I have left and the little hope that I have left, trying to make my best through a bad set of choices. So yeah, the Fragile. There you go. That brings the Fragile period to a close. There are two addendums to this, by the way. Post the Fragile, the first post-Fragile track was released on the soundtrack to this truly bloody appalling movie, Tomb Raider. It's called Deep. You need to give the film absolutely no thought whatsoever. The track, pretty good. Sounds just like everything off the Fragile, by the way. And then in 2017, maybe 2018, we had the release of Fragile Deviations. This is an instrumental reconstruction of the album. Effectively a bonus disc to go alongside the vinyl edition of the Fragile here, and you can't really know this without knowing that. So this is a 2.5-hour album. It features different and instrumental mixes of every track, so every track which has a vocal doesn't have a vocal on this. There are 9 or 10 new songs on the Fragile Deviations as well. It was a one-time vinyl pressing across 4 vinyl discs. It retailed for a staggering £75 when it first came out, and it's probably actually more than that now because it's difficult to get hold of. So it features a track called Missing Pieces, One Way to Get There, Taken, White Mask, Was It Worth It, Appendage, Can I Stay Here, Feeders, Claustrophobia Machine, Last Heard From. And so those are the new tracks, and all the music was recorded in 1999. The tracks were finished and mixed by Trent and Atticus in 2017, and then presented on 4 vinyl discs. No CD release, which I think is a great shame, actually. In fact, Nine Inch Nails really need to get better at releasing deluxe multi-disc CD, DVD versions of their albums. The material and the demand is definitely there, but it's a fascinating insight into all that could have been the alternate version of the album, my version of the Fragile, which I have on my phone and my music player, interpolates the missing songs from this into the Fragile and creates a 2.5-hour version of the album that is both exhaustive and exhausting. It's a bloody monster. And there, by the way, is the picture of the waterfall, which I can't pronounce the name of the waterfall. in Finland or Iceland, which you can see just a tiny fragment, a little reminder of, on the cover of the Fragile itself. Um, the Fragile is an amazing record that is impossible to digest in one go. It's too much, it's too big, it's too long, it's a feast, and you can't eat the whole thing in one go. It's like trying to watch all of Star Trek or something. If you did it, you'd start hallucinating, and you would stop making sense of everything. So you need to digest the Fragile in a series of pieces over a period of time. It was an album that really didn't hit me at the time that it came out. It's only in retrospect, looking back at it after having lived through some stuff, that I realised just how good an album it is. Um, I'm not afraid to say I didn't get it at the time. It was the last album of the 90s. It was the album that brought the 90s to an end. You know, it was the last gasp, really, of Nine Inch Nails from the 90s before they became kind of overtaken by other acts. And this is not to say anything, but if you stand still long enough, eventually things start to overtake you. And Nine Inch Nails took 5 years away between the release of the Downward Spiral and the release of the Fragile. And the world changed and Nine Inch Nails changed, but not necessarily together in the same direction. So that is a good place to wrap up. If you've watched to the end of this, congratulations, you've earned yourself a biscuit and a cup of tea. If you haven't and you've skimmed through it, naughty, naughty, but I still love you. Take care of yourselves, stay beautiful, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye everybody. Where is everybody? See you later.